Happy Friday.
Super excited. I think we've got another great show. I shouldn't say.
Yeah,
I should show preference, but
Dr. Eben Alexander, how are you, sir?
Well, I'm doing great. It's wonderful to be with both you guys today, and appreciate the invite.
Yeah, appreciate your time. Before we go any further, I have to ask: was it Ebenezer at one point? Like, I know you were, was that
literally, that was a family name 6 generations back.
Wow!
They dropped the Ezer. That was
first of all, you're hanging on to a name.
That's how far back all that business goes. So.
Wow. I think it's awesome that your family's hanging on to a name for 6 generations. That's like
yes. Well, it creates some interesting scenarios. So
I'm not going to lie. If this was my name, I might be kind of throwing in the Ebenezer every once in a while.
But are you like, do you have, I'm technically the third. Do you have that after your name as well and just don't use it?
I have the third, but as we share in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, I'm actually the fifth.
Right.
Wow.
And that was, but they recycled the names with my grandfather, whose father had already died. And that's why he started it over. He went from being the third to being the senior in his own eyes. And so they renamed it all. That's actually an interesting feature of our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, because a psychic who did some reading on me figured it all out. She was tripping up over this multi-generational
shit. That's funny.
What happened? So anyway, it's to me, it was an indicator she knew what she was talking about.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, like, tripping her up because she's like, "What the hell's going on?"
The nomenclature's messing me up.
Yeah.
Even my sisters, I have 3 sisters I grew up with, and they didn't know that whole story. Only my father and I knew it all. And somehow this psychic picked up on it, and that's what helped kind of prove her worth to me.
Wow, that is so crazy.
You know, I really am fascinated by family histories because there's so many stories like that. My great grandmother came over here from the Azores. So the legend goes, pregnant with my grandmother, right? And they were Portuguese, swore up and down, and I got my 23andMe, and yeah, we were Portuguese, but we were part of a Welsh religious persecution migration in the 1600s out of Wales to the Azores specifically. So I'm sitting there when I got it, it's like, you're 60% Welsh. I'm like, what the fuck? Like, that's not at all what I was, that's not at all what I was told. And then my grandmother was dead at the point, and my mom's like, dude, she would literally, she's rolling over in her grave just hearing this in the universe. I'm like, I mean, listen, but these stories are so interesting because, like, we didn't have any records to keep, and I'm wondering if in 100 years any of our ancestors will have, if the more records will help them in any way. Or
well, I think already that's happening. I think with Ancestry and 23andMe, with people having their DNA out there, it's amazing how specific the stuff is. And so when you really have a full DNA data set on somebody, it can give you a tremendous amount of information about where that heritage came from. So to me, it's all fascinating.
And I have a biological father that I never met. And so, like, there's a whole nother curiosity there. We have a health podcast, and like one of the first things doctors and everybody talk to us about is family history.
I'm like,
well, I'm missing 50% of that equation, like right out of the gate. So, like,
that's an interesting part of my story is that I was adopted.
Yeah.
So I spent the first 54 years of my life completely ignorant of my birth family. And I didn't realize I had a birth family. I thought I had a birth mother out there. But in my mind, my birth father had disappeared from the scene long ago. And then in the year 2000, this is all a story told in my book, Proof of Heaven. But in the year 2000, when my older son was doing a family genealogy project at school, he said, Dad, we need to know more about your birth family. And I thought, okay, fine. We'll write another letter to the children's home, get the same answers before. She's not looking for you, so forget about her. And that's not the answer we got.
Wow.
My birth parents had gotten married, and not only that, they had 3 children. So I had a whole family out there that I'd never known about the first 54 years of my life. And sadly, at the time, the North Carolina laws were very strict about any kind of reunion. This is in the year 2000.
Why would they give a shit about that? Like, I mean, like, what a stupid thing to get hung up on.
Yeah. Anyway, the social worker had to kind of fudge over some of the facts, and what she told me was, because my birth family had lost my youngest sister 2 years earlier in 1998, they were still grieving her loss, and it was not a good time to come back in their lives. And that was kind of a made up piece from the social worker, because she couldn't share more identifying information with me, but it ended up sending me into a tailspin. You find out, if you read adoption literature, that when an adoptee gets another rejection as an adult from the birth family, it can really kick them over the edge. And that's what happened to me for the 8 years leading up to my coma. And I finally met my birth family a year before coma, and that made a tremendous difference. Anybody who's read the book Proof of Heaven will realize, oh my God, that's what kind of shifted everything and played a huge role in my near-death experience. So,
you know what, Doc? We didn't even get to ask you the question, but you kind of went into
it anyway. Yeah.
And this is kind of how I knew who you were. Proof of Heaven itself. But if you can kind of give us your story, tell us how you got here.
Yeah, I'll try and be kind of brief, because it's out there in big
long form show.
Anyway, so I want to leave plenty of room for questions for you guys.
Trust me, we'll
where you have issues or questions or concerns or what have you. So anyway, but briefly, my background is that I grew up in a very scientific family. My adoptive father was a globally renowned neurosurgeon. He was very much a scientist. He knew all about Big Bang cosmology, but for him, he had grown up in a Presbyterian church in Eastern Tennessee. His own father was a general surgeon, took him to church every Sunday. And my dad was a combat surgeon in the Second World War. He was in the Pacific Theater. And I still have at my bedside his little pocket Bible that had New Testament and Psalms that I think got him through World War II relatively unscathed. He was overseas more than 2 years, and in fact had trouble getting back because his commanding officer, once they got to Japan, wouldn't let him go because he was fully trained in neurosurgery, ENT, etc. So anyway, my father, very influential in my life. He had a strong belief in God and power of prayer. But like many of us who grew up in the 60s and 70s, I always knew that science is the pathway to truth. I didn't really care about biblical stories and all that. I knew that science would tell us about the nature of reality. But I made the big mistake so many of us do in thinking deterministic Newtonian science was the answer, and it's not. Quantum physics completely opens the door to the primacy of consciousness, and that's where I was headed, was trying to understand all that. Anyway, so when I fell ill, which was actually 17 years ago this week, I'm having an anniversary.
Wow.
And not only that, it's the same days of the week as what occurred back in 2008.
Oh, that's
so I
wild.
went to coma Monday, November 10th. And that's what we just passed through. I came out of coma Sunday, November 16th. And that's where we're approaching this week.
Yeah, we're
anyway, I'm having an anniversary celebration, of my coming out of coma. So now
different kind of coming out party.
What an amazing thing to celebrate too. I get celebrating it, but it's almost like a rebirth. It's a very
it's absolutely that. And people often say, "Oh gosh, what a terrible thing to happen, to go through this horrible E. coli gram-negative bacterial meningitis."
Wow.
Is that what it was? I was going to ask when you were done. Yeah.
But the reality is, to me, it was the biggest blessing of my life. I mean, the lessons I came back with, the healing is completely unexpected in this kind of a case. And that's why there's a medical case report on my medical records. It came out in September 2018 in the Journal of Nervous and Mental Diseases. And that case report makes it crystal clear my brain was way too damaged from the meningitis to have a dream or hallucination, much less this incredibly robust spiritual reality that I got to witness. And not only that, but the peer review editors challenged the authors of the case report and said, how do you explain this? It's unprecedented to have somebody that sick from bacterial meningitis to then make a full recovery and over a few months. How do you explain it? And they said it's because he had a near-death experience. They knew of other cases of people who had had, like Anita Morjani, she wrote a book called Dying to Be Me. And that particular, she had advanced lymphoma, was within hours of death by any doctor's analysis. That was back, I think it was in 2006 in February in Hong Kong. That's when she was hospitalized. But she should have died. But she didn't. And she had this vision that included her father informing her that if she chose to come back to this world, the cancer would disappear. And that's exactly what happened. So anyway, they knew of stories like that. And that's really the important lesson of my case report, is that profound spiritual experiences can lead to extraordinary healing. So anyway, getting back into my little case, the other important thing to point out about it is that there was an atypical feature of my near-death experience. I was completely amnesic for the life of Eben Alexander. I had no language, no knowledge of Earth, this universe. It truly was an empty slate. And it took me months after coma to begin to appreciate why that complete deletion of memories, because as I came back out of coma, initially, the only thing I knew when I woke up was where I'd just been, that extraordinary spiritual journey. I didn't even recognize my mother, my sisters, my sons at the bedside, although those memories came back very rapidly, like within an hour or two. All of that was coming back, language and everything, and memory of the personal connections. But at the time I went through the 7-day coma, I had no knowledge of Eben Alexander's life, Earth, or human. So it was an empty slate. And the way that started was a place I call the Earth Were My View, a very primitive, of course, unresponsive realm. But I was rescued from that by this slowly spinning white light that came packaged with a perfect musical melody. And the music is important because music, vibration, frequency was a theme throughout that allowed me to traverse these various spiritual levels. And anybody who knows my work now realize for the last 15, 16 years, I've been working with Karen Newell and specifically with binaural beat brainwave entrainment, with a form of meditation that uses slightly different frequencies to the two ears. Anyway,
we've done an episode on that. We've talked to a couple people on it. The neurovisor,
absolutely love it.
Is like one of my favorite things on the earth now, because it does brain entrainment through light and sound. Yeah. And it's like amazing.
We can talk about that in a little bit.
Yeah.
But anyway, getting back into my story. So it turns out that first time witnessing this melody and this beautiful light portal that led me up into this rich, ultra real gateway valley. It was like Plato's world of ideals, a world of perfection, but for the individual soul. And so this gateway valley,
like your idea of perfection.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So
right.
My little personal journey to perfection. But at any rate, what that involved for me was being in this incredible valley of perfection. And that's where we would go through life reviews. And life reviews is something I'll also want to discuss in a little bit, because the very nature of them is very important in understanding what all is going on here. So at any rate, I'm a speck of awareness on a butterfly wing. I had no body awareness at all. There were millions of other butterflies looping and spiraling in vast formations, incredible beauty, colors beyond the rainbow. I mean, these words just fail miserably at depicting the kind of joy and awe and majesty of this realm. But I remember seeing thousands of beings down in the meadow below, dancing, lots of joy and merriment, festivities. There were waterfalls and crystal blue pools, and this children playing, dogs jumping, all these festivities, all being fueled because up above were these swooping orbs of what I labeled in my early writings, these angelic choirs that were emanating chants and anthems, hymns that would just thunder through my awareness. And when I wrote it all down, I said, these beings that I saw dancing and all this festivity going on, that they were souls between lives. And I kind of had a glimpse of that, but I got a bigger glimpse as this all moves forward. And the best part about that aspect of the Gateway Valley was that I wasn't alone. There was a beautiful young woman beside me on the butterfly wing, sparkling blue eyes, high forehead, high cheekbones, broad smile. She never said a word. She never had to. She looked at me with this look of pure love. And her message that came to me, and it wasn't delivered as words, but as pure conceptual flow, but that I translated in the words weeks later as I wrote this all down. The message was, you are deeply loved and cherished forever. You have nothing to fear. You're richly cared for. You can do no wrong. Now, I wish I'd explained that last phrase better in the book, because by this point in my journey, what I'm realizing is, given all the light and love of that Gateway Valley, going through a life review there, if you've ever been greedy or selfish or handed out pain or suffering to others, in that light and love, your actions would look especially bad. And that's life reviews are all about the golden rule being written into the fabric of the universe. Treat others as you would like to be treated. Because in the life review, about 3/4 of people say the events they go through are shared perspective from everybody involved. So this is not just your little ego's life review. This is the life review of events in your life that actually takes an objective viewpoint of how you treated others. And that's why the life review is so important. And it teaches us to treat others as we would like to be treated, the golden rule. So anyway, all of that richness was apparent to me. And yet some people, when they read the book Proof of Heaven and saw You Can Do No Wrong, they weren't picking up on the spiritual ambience of that area.
They're like, party.
Sorry.
I almost feel like that might have stoked their egos even more in some cases. Huh?
I think you're exactly right. And some people think, oh, gosh, this is like a get out of jail free card. I can
do whatever I want.
It's not. Because in that realm, and I know this from talking with thousands of other near-death experiences, I couldn't have an Eben Alexander life review because of my amnesia, but I saw life reviews and reincarnation in very powerful fashion as this whole story moves forward. So anyway,
real quick, the amnesia, you meaning like you forgot about Eben? Like
I had no
in
language,
this space.
I had no knowledge of humans
nothing.
or this earth, or it was all gone. And so I was just witnessing these all these incredible events, trying to kind of connect me with the universe, but without giving that big reveal of my personal identity. And I realized why that happened, because if I'd had a more standard NDE, I would have been more, in spite of a 1 in 10 million diagnosis of E. coli meningitis in an adult, in spite of a 1 in a billion recovery, I would have been tempted to think, oh gosh, I guess you just see who you want to see on the way out. And that's why my journey had to take me that much deeper, that involved this amnesia, also involved seeing all my memories dissolved and gone away, but then those memories came back after I woke up. It took about 2 months, but the personal memories, a lot of that came back within hours. So anyway, that's
wild by itself right there, like that you had this sort of like phase shift mentally that like kind of, it's like lift and set, like we'll take these away for right now and then we'll just put them back later.
Exactly. And that's what I had to make sense of.
Yeah.
I have kind of like, and I feel like this question is kind of mundane, but like, so you're out for 6 days,
7 days. Well,
7 days.
I woke up on the 7th day. Right?
Okay. When we're in this space that seems to be more mystical, more spiritual, time changes. Did it seem like this was a forever thing? Did this seem like you had a dream?
It's absolutely like a forever thing. In fact, if you would ask me when I first woke up on day 7, Earth Day 7, how long were you gone? I would have thought months or years. I mean, it was a very extraordinary journey. But you raise an extremely important point.
Which was going to be my exact question, by the way, Tom. Maybe we've spent too much time together, but
I think Matt and I have been living in this space for a while now, and it's starting to kind of stick.
I'm like, was it 7 days?
But you raise a very interesting point. I was going to make this later. But I
jumping the gun here. Sorry.
I should make it now. And that is, if you study life reviews, and by study, I'll give you a source. The source is an article by Dr. Bruce Grayson. He's a skeptical psychiatrist at UVA who studied these kind of NDE, near-death experience cases for 45 plus years. And he wrote an article in the Journal of Near-Death Studies. It came out in the autumn of 2021. And he reviewed almost 700 life reviews from the University of Virginia database of more than 1,000 near-death experiences. And he makes several very interesting points in those life reviews. I think most importantly, I'm gonna get the exact numbers here for you, because I want to give you some facts and not just my opinion about things. But in these 700 cases, he says like 37% of them involve their entire life. Everything. There was no exclusion. And you might think, well, wait a minute, during a 10-minute cardiac arrest, how do you have a full life review? And the reason is, in that realm, you're completely outside of Earth time. you're absolutely in an eternal realm. So birth, death, everything in between can be witnessed simultaneously. Not only that, but events in prior lifetimes and in future lifetimes. We can talk about the scientific basis of reincarnation in just a few minutes. But all of that becomes obvious to you in the moment. That's one of the reasons that NDEs are ineffable. They're beyond our language. That kind of awareness of all these interconnections and kind of facts of your existence, in many ways, is kind of overwhelming. So that's the first key point. 47% of people said it was like a reliving of events, not just a remembering, like they were still happening. That's very important because it is a reliving, not a remembering. This is showing us something very powerful about the universe and about the nature of consciousness. 76% of those people stress that the life review was from the perspective of everybody involved. That's 3/4 of them witnessing this kind of sharing the dream of the one mind kind of theme. And 84% said that the events in the life review were more real than lived experience memories.
That's insane.
So you eliminate the boundary of self.
Could you imagine that though? 3/4 of that. That means this show on all of our life reviews, I'm going to get to see your point of view, Tom's point of view, my wife in the other room's point of view. Like it all kind of merges together. And that's just like,
but interestingly enough, we have free will. You know, the materialist scientist in me before coma would have scoffed at you for claiming free will, because they would have said it's all chemical reactions, electron fluxes in the brain. There's no place you could inject free will into that brain system of material following the laws of physics, chemistry, biology. And yet most of us sense that free will is absolutely part of our existence. And the best way to accommodate that is to realize that quantum indeterminacy from quantum physics makes it clear that free will is possible. Once you kind of acknowledge that all that we experience is governed by, the rules of quantum physics, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle absolutely applies to ion channels and synaptic vesicles in neurons. And according to neuroscience, neurons are at the very heart of all conscious awareness. So once you realize that it's actually a quantum computing system, then you start to get why quantum physics and consciousness are so deeply interrelated.
I'm very, very involved with a quantum computer company. And so I get to play with these conversations.
Well, that's good.
At that level every day. And I absolutely love it. The CEO of that company was on the show a couple months ago. And I joke, I think we broke Tom that day. It was a little...
it was, because these concepts, right? Where do you contextualize them? How do you hold them in your day-to-day life? Right. If I'm worried about paying a bill or I got to get my kid at school and then you're like, wait a minute, hold on. We're all the same thing. We're all interconnected. And I physically can't do both at the same time. Right. If I'm in more of this materialistic world mode, it is very like, I almost feel like you need that near-death experience. You need that.
Right.
It helps.
I'm stepping out of normal consciousness for X number of hours or days to explore that and actually internalize it.
Well, I think, these are very important points. And I'll share with you that I've spent the last probably 13 years of my life meditating an hour or two a day. Not just to return to my NDE to recover memories, but to develop a much more active interplay with that primordial mind and with the guidance, with, as we tell in our third book, Living in a Mindful Universe, I share how I finally connected with the soul of my adoptive father, because he was nowhere to be found. He had passed over 4 years before my coma, and yet he was not a feature. But he came to me in meditation 2.5 years post-coma, where he made it very clear why he couldn't be a parent to me, as he put it. And it was because of what I mentioned earlier, that if he had been there as my kind of spiritual guide, at the end of the day, I would have been much more tempted to dismiss it all as a trick of the dying brain. You see who you want to see on the way out, all that kind of thing. But the universe had another trick in mind for me, and that's why my spiritual guide was not my adoptive father, but in fact was someone very important to me from my birth family that I never knew. And I won't share a whole lot more of that, but that is kind of the shocking reality that comes together at the end of the book, Proof of Heaven, that I think appeals to a lot of people because it's such an extraordinary story.
Yeah, and I've got a question after Matt here.
Yeah, I just, you know what, you touched on it, and I know we're kind of spaghettiing around here a little bit, but I think that, forget about everybody listening, but for sure, let's talk about Matt. Matt wants to know, right? Matt wants to know, like, look, to call me a skeptic would be a little bit weird because, yeah, I've got a healthy dose of skepticism, but like, I'm a little out there as a person. So like most things, I'm pretty easy to convince, right? But when it comes to this sort of near-death thing, right? And we've had Bob Kopez, I think he was head of the International Near-Death.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I know him well. He's
and we had Betty Gardeno on, who had another weird experience, and like she's hanging out with her life review with convicted killers and all this crazy stuff that gets like kind of out there, right?
Right.
And like, so her story and Bob's stories were the ones that kind of ground me back into saying, okay, well, there might be something bigger going on here. Because like, look, I also have been in the alternative chemical side of things, cannabis, psychedelics, et cetera, for 20 years.
About that too.
Yeah.
Very relevant in this discussion.
And listen, DMT's a fucking powerful compound, man. Like there's and we're making it like crazy in that particular juncture of biology, right? We're just cranking that stuff out. So talk to me what your thoughts are on like the balance between how much of this could be my imagination, my overflood of DMT in my system, I don't know.
I think the important things to point out, I've certainly considered that. Sam Harris, in fact, on his blog postings, accused me of simply having a DMT trip. And
I mean,
next day.
Is it?
It's not even unfounded, right? Like it's
even if it is that, why?
Well, let me just tell you what I did to find out. I mean, given he makes that accusation, says it's all a DMT trip. There are certainly a number of people around the world who subscribe to that thinking that DMT, kind of a splurge of DMT dumped out of the pineal gland, at the time of death, might explain these extraordinary experiences. So I participated in a dose escalation study, and I smoked 5-methoxy DMT, 48 milligrams.
I was going to joke and say, "What'd you take, a fistful of DMT?"
No, I went to 40 milligrams, and what I can tell you is I believe that DMT and I would say also other serotonin 2A type psychedelics, magic mushrooms, psilocybin, LSD, and of course DMT is part of ayahuasca. Those are all serotonin 2A agonist psychedelics. And they're very important in this discussion. But to me, what happened with that 5-methoxy DMT, yes, it gave me an incredibly rich kind of deconstruction of the space-time continuum in a powerful, powerful way. And I believe it gave me a teeny glimpse into the spiritual realm. But I would compare that with my NDE. My NDE was like being in the penthouse suite with a panoramic view of the entire horizon. Whereas the DMT was like peeking through this tiny keyhole. The analogy I used in the book Proof of Heaven, I talked about looking through a window on a dark and stormy night where you can hardly make out anything else. That was kind of my early experience down in the Earthworm Eye View. But once I ascended up into the Gateway Valley, everything was totally different. And that's where I would say that those psychedelics do give us a glimpse into the spiritual realm. They can introduce us to various spiritual guides and mentors and forces of kind of wisdom and knowing in that realm. But to me, meditation is a far more powerful, reliable mechanism of connecting to that realm than the psychedelics. Now, some people might want one dose of psychedelic to give them a kind of a reference point, like I have my NDE as a reference point. But I must say, it saddened me in a lot of this travel talking about these topics to encounter groups of people who were, for example, taking a lot of ayahuasca, and they didn't seem to be making very much spiritual advance.
There's a lot of that.
And there are two features I'd like to mention about psychedelics at this point in the discussion. One is that there were papers started coming out in the year 2012 that showed that if you use functional MRI and magnetoencephalography, which are two of the very best techniques we have for looking at the brain and seeing what neurons are, actively promoting certain activities, it turns out that when you're taking those psychedelics, your brain goes quiet. You won't find a neuronal population that's increasing in firing output. All you find is dissolution. They're getting out of the way. So when I read that first paper from Robin Carhart Harris, Imperial College London in 2012, I went, of course, I know what it's like when meningitis took my neocortex away. I had this robust expansion of conscious awareness. And yet, with the psychedelics, it seems to be a little more limited. But boy, I can tell you, when you unmask the possibility of the spiritual behind what the brain is doing, because a lot of what the brain is doing is inhibitory. And in fact, with the psychedelics, you find out that all you're accomplishing is shutting down the brain's activity. The default mode network, which is a major network that's responsible for, kind of daydreaming with eyes closed, no specific task, but being an ego self and kind of sense of here and now, that default mode network just dissolves under the influence of these psychedelics. That's one important point. There have been many papers to confirm that since then. So as a neuroscientist, if you want to use very powerful techniques of looking at neurons to explain those phenomenal experiences, most people who've taken those drugs, those psychedelics, would say, my brain must be lighting up like a Christmas tree. But it's not. It's going dark. It's getting out of the way. Now, that's one important point, but there's a second very important point to make about psychedelics. Roland Griffiths, who was at Johns Hopkins, sadly passed away, I think about a year ago. It was in October, I think.
Yeah, he was part of that program down there.
Yeah, he was huge. Yeah. He was a big part of, fighting the legislators to get this stuff legal again, which is very important because it tells us a lot about consciousness. But Griffiths did some interesting pilot studies. One of them was dealing with debilitating fear of death in terminal cancer patients. Mm-hmm. And the other studies all dealt with addictions, alcoholism, narcotics, etc. And what he found is a single dose of psilocybin, magic mushrooms, one single dose given to the patient in a favorable setting. And they don't take any more, but a year later, 80% of them are still cured of their addiction or their fear of death. Now, that's a very important point. So you don't have to keep taking the psychedelic. It's the one exposure that I think allows you to kind of connect to higher soul. And you come back in ways, anything you can do to get your ego out of the way, because the ego is always at the heart of addictions and so many of our life problems. And a near-death experience is a way of rising above the ego, because you connect more with your kind of higher soul and you have greater kind of wisdom of all these things, etc. So ego dissolution is the important ingredient here. And that's what Griffiths proved in these pilot studies, was an incredible success rate with one dose. And then a year later, 80% of those people still having tremendous benefit. And what I would argue is that you can use meditation to accomplish the same goal. And sacredacoustics.com is the meditation I recommend. That's what I use.
Okay.
Which one?
And I know through the workshops we've given that a lot of other people have benefited from it too.
That was my question right there. Please repeat that. What meditation are you using?
.com is kind of the resource for binaural beat brainwave entrainment. And full disclosure, my wife, Karen Newell, who is the co-author of our third book, Living in a Mindful Universe, she was the co-founder with Kevin Caussey of Sacred Acoustics back in 2011 or 2012, something like that. They did it under my encouragement because they had been designing these. Kevin Caussey's the sound engineer who's constructed these beautiful Sacred Acoustics binaural beat brainwave entrainment files. He does that work through Karen and through me, but Kevin is really the brains behind it. But Karen and I have also participated tremendously in the unfolding of each and every one of those products. But the interesting thing, if you go to sacredacoustics.com, you can learn a lot more about all this. But in our workshops, people get tremendous value out of these. And these may be people who've never had an NDE, have never taken psychedelics, and yet even in a first exposure to the Sacred Acoustics in the workshop setting, they can end up, encountering souls of departed loved ones. All kinds of healing things can happen to them. So I'm a big proponent of that. for me, meditation is what I recommend, not the psychedelics, because I think it's a simpler and safer way, and that you actually can make more progress over time. There's quite a big splash from the psychedelics, and if you have any kind of spiritual or mental imbalances at all, they can really throw you off the cliff. So I view meditation as a more powerful and reliable way to get to that goal of spiritual enlightenment and knowledge of kind of higher self and soul.
And we're seeing that a lot.
Yeah.
Sorry,
I gotta say this. We've had near-death experience people. We've had neuroscientists on. We've had gurus coming in tie-dye t-shirts. And you're the first person I think we've ever had on that wears all three of those hats.
Yeah.
And
it is a different thing.
Absolutely amazing to hear a neuroscientist speaking about spirituality in an open and experiential way, right? This isn't, this is just what patients said, it's just mind-blowing that here I am thinking of a question, and before I get to ask it, you've already started explaining the answer.
Well, we're all connected. We're all doing this together. We're all trying our best, and there's a tremendous amount of evidence that we're sharing that one mind.
But you're also your head's on straight in the sense that you're like, hey, you know what? That's a fair point. Maybe it is DMT. Let's go find out.
Well, I want to know. Okay. I've always been open-minded, and this kind of forced me to really open my mind even more. But I want to know the answers. And for me, I remain a scientist. That will never change. And I can tell you that the scientific world is running ahead with this. In fact, if you go to bigelowinstitute.org, you will find 29 essays, all written by scientists who had at least 5 years research experience checking into the afterlife question.
What was that site again?
It's called bigelowinstitute.org, and it's named after Robert Bigelow. He's an aerospace engineer in Las Vegas. He'd lost his wife, his son had committed suicide, and he's scientific. He wanted to know what's the scientific evidence that their soul is still around. So he put it out there. This is back in 2021. He was going to give out 3 monetary awards, but the essays from all over the world were so good, he ended up giving out 29 monetary awards. And
wow.
All 29 of those essays are available to the reading public for free. And once you start reading them at bigelowinstitute.org, you'll quickly realize that we've graduated far beyond, well, does science really acknowledge the afterlife, to absolutely the scientific evidence for the afterlife is overwhelming. So just accept it as real. And not only that, but a bunch of them talk about reincarnation. And the reincarnation data is something I didn't know about before my coma. But it turns out only 60 miles north of me in Charlottesville, Virginia. I now live right outside of Charlottesville because I work pretty closely with that group. But there was a group called the Division of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia. And since the late 1960s, they've been studying some of these, exotic cases of mind beyond brain. And it all started actually with children in 1968 that Ian Stevenson, who was the head of psychiatry at UVA, found that these children were claiming to have memories from past lives. And he thought, well, that's interesting. Let's see where that comes from. And of course,
I want that so badly, Eben. I cannot tell you how badly I want to do that. I mean, the whole thing's awesome to think about, but we had Dave the Mystic on, funny, greatest name possibly ever. And he and I worked together after the show, and he said, yeah, you and your wife, this is the 4th time you guys have done it. Twice was been you as the man, twice it's been her as the man, and like all this stuff. And I'm like, what a wild thing it would be to just have a memory of one day of any of those experiences, right? Like just even one day. And here's where I get tripped up. The skeptic in me starts coming to the table and saying, like, a woman yesterday was on the show and said, she got hit by a drunk driver.
I guarantee he knows Marilyn Schlitz. Do you know
Marilyn Schlitz? Yeah.
Yeah, she was head of
yeah, so
why wouldn't you know her? We
she
booked everybody. No one knew.
Yeah, so Marilyn's on last night. She said, when I was 16, I had this motorcycle accident leaving a bar. I wasn't supposed to be there. And I had this out-of-body experience where I saw my body hurling through space. And I told her the same thing I'll tell you right now. Hearing that story, I was clearly not there. We only just met. I have nothing to do with this story, but I can also see my body hurling through space, having just got hit on a motorcycle I was clearly never on in an experience I was never a part of. Why can I do that? Because I have a really vivid imagination. And so for me, there's this distrust between like what I see. If I did get my wish and I did have a memory of another life, I would automatically discount that, I think, as it's just my imagination going crazy.
Well, that's what most of us are basically trained to do in this society. But it turns out if you go to uvadops.org, you'll find that's the
we're going to have like a library of websites.
Division of Perceptual Studies, but you'll find they've studied more than 2,500 cases of past life memories in children. Now that in and of itself is, interesting. Okay, so they did all that. Well, guess what? In 1,700 of those cases, they actually found the person who lived before.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God.
And a lot of those were back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, before the internet, et cetera. But the point is the research has been very well done. In fact, in Ian Stevenson, he did the original work, and in his original series, something, I don't remember the exact number, but somewhere around 20 to 30% of the cases he studied, the children actually had a birth defect or deformity that matched the lethal wound of their prior incarnation.
No fucking way. That's crazy.
Was he the one that wrote Old Souls?
I don't know if he wrote Old Souls, but he was never sensationalistic about it. I mean, Ian Stevenson was a very solid, down-to-earth scientific mind. That's one of the reasons why this stuff is news to a lot of people, is they had to keep under the radar. In fact, even today, the administrators at the University of Virginia potentially could try and shut them down if they say anything that's too outlandish. So these people have done incredibly good research. And
that's incredible.
1,700 solved cases. And they also, I recently saw a paper from that group where they did the prospective piece, which I've always been looking for. That, it's one thing to ask people who remembers past lives. The other thing is to take a population of children in the modern world forward and see how many of them claim past lives. That gives you a much better number for how big a process this is. And that number is 7% in the United States in the current era, that 7% of kids have the kind of claims that are identical to the claims made in those 1,700 cases where they actually found the person who lived before.
So now when I get,
you don't remember it, because the other key thing is Stevenson and Jim Tucker, who wrote a beautiful book called Before that I highly recommend. Jim Tucker was the head of Division of Perceptual Studies until the last few months or so. But anyway, he's vetted a lot of these cases, and as he'll tell you, and Ian Stevenson will tell you, is after age 6 or 7, those memories are covered over. The kids don't remember.
I was going to ask, does it just sort of like go away, like dissolve into?
Fade away. Now they can return through hypnotic regression, meditation. If you have a near-death experience, all of that can kind of let these things be uncovered again. But for most of us, we go through life after age 6 or 7, we don't have those memories anymore. And so we don't think of reincarnation at all. And I just say that's a statement more about the state of evolution of humanity in the modern era. And do remember that there are cultures out there, especially like in the East, where reincarnation is widely accepted. So there you'll have whole communities where they'll be referring to the people who were reincarnated, and everybody's like, yawn, next story, please. But for us, it's big news.
I mean, Dave said I'm on 237 or something like that, right? So I'm like, okay, I did this 237 times. I just want, give me 6 Polaroids of.
Let me get it right.
Just let me. Well, he said the outer limit. He said there's some people that are in like single digits. Most people are over 100, but he said he's had worked with people that have been 2,800. I think is the most he's had.
I'm sorry, who are you quoting now?
Dave the Mystic.
He was an electrical engineer who had a sort of a
awakening,
if you will.
More power to him for sharing it.
Yeah, I mean, this is what he does full time now. And listen, like I said to my wife when we got off the show, I was like, today was a big one, hon. I was like, I went in and we went in. And I think we kind of reflected on it and said, like, look, even if he's full of shit, right? Like, just let's go completely to the skeptic side. it's an interesting way to perceive the world, because even if you just took his story about me at face value, look, my wife and I have done this 3 different times. They were kind of like not super successful the past 3. Like, he painted a kind of a grim picture. Our current existence is not really like any of those at all. So he's like, yeah, maybe you guys finally figured it out. He goes, but the good news is, or the bad news, depending on how you want to look at it, most people don't go into +4. Like, it's like 4 is kind of the max. Like, you probably won't come back to her again. Like, and I'm like, look, just again, at face value, this is the best version of those 3. Makes sense. Maybe it took this long to get it kind of right-ish, and we're like gonna shake hands and be like, all right, cool.
That was
this
great.
was awesome.
Yeah.
We're gonna move on. I got a couple other 2-fers here I got to take care of. a couple.
I gotta go mess it up
single-
with somebody else a bunch of times.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
We're all here to learn and teach together, and often that involves soul groups reincarnating together.
Soul families is a fun one to contemplate as well. So
Monads.
Well, there's one book I'd recommend if you're interested in the whole notion of reincarnating together as souls. And I won't share a lot about it because it's a great book and I don't want to spoil it for anybody. It's called The Boy Who Knew Too Much. It's by Kathy Bird.
Tom already bought it on Amazon, trust me.
I won't tell you any more, but it's a very good book about the very topic of souls reincarnating together. And I think that case was vetted by Jim Tucker at UVA. So, you want a pro to have gone through the case to start with. And I know Jim Tucker went through that case. But anyway, so that book, The Boy Who Knew Too Much, and also another one, a reincarnation story that's really kind of mind-bending, is in a book called Soul, S-O-U-L, Survivor. And that's by, I think, Bruce and Andrea Leininger, and they're writing about their son, James Leininger, who actually turns out to be a World War II fighter pilot who died in the Battle of Iwo Jima in March 1945, and then was reincarnated 53 years later in Louisiana as a young boy who had nightmares and phobias, and all these nightmares were about his plane catching on fire, being shot at by the Japanese, and all that kind of thing. So, but if you read Soul Survivor, and also in that BigelowInstitute.org essay contest, the Leiningers did submit one of those papers that won the 29 monetary awards. So you can read their kind of deeper scientific take on it at the BigelowInstitute.org website.
That's awesome. So, like, okay, so let's get back to the tactical part with you, because it seems like you've done a lot of work post coma and a lot of like detangling of this whole thing. Like, I mean, I don't want to like overly reduce this question, but it's kind of like the best I could do here. Like, what's the takeaway from this? Like, how do we sort of like integrate this into things? It's like, look, I've been very open on this show. I have a paralytic fear of death, always have. I'm not sure if that's ever going to change. So there's a part of me that wants to believe all these stories carte blanche, right? Because I'm like, look, that would solve this paralyzing problem I've had my entire life. But then the skeptic in me is like, it's just DMT, in which case, if you go back to, a couple of the early psychonauts, they're like, I can't wait to die. That 18 seconds of DMT bliss is going to be fucking amazing.
But that's your entree into eternity, and you don't exist. See, that's where the materialists are telling a bleak and paltry fiction that you can choose to believe if you want to. I don't see why you would, given that all the evidence points the other way. Yet, it to me is surprising that people aren't willing to accept this incredible bounty of scientific evidence for the reality of the afterlife and reincarnation, and they keep getting into their armchair philosopher position and saying, well, I don't remember past lives, and I think when your body dies, that's the end of everything. Well, that is a position that's not acknowledging a tremendous body of data that's out there that suggests that our brain is not the producer of consciousness, but the brain is a transceiver or a filter. And there are multiple layers of filtering mechanisms within the brain that allow for that primordial mind, that God mind that we all share, to dissociate into a little eddy current of consciousness off the primordial mind that we think is our own. And yet, for example, in parapsychology, telepathy, Guillaume Playfair wrote a beautiful book called Twin Telepathy, where he estimates that 35% of identical twins have powerful telepathic experiences. One twin can touch a hot stove, and the other twin 1,000 miles away can feel pain and develop a blister.
Wow.
So really strong connection. Now, it's not just identical twins. For example, when I first met my birth family, it was about 13 months before my coma. Had a lot of reunion, going to the beach, weekends, meeting different aunts, uncles, getting to know them. But then we spent about 3 months where I was not in any touch with my birth mother at all. And those 3 months ended November 10th of 2008. When she came back from a business meeting, she was a realtor. And she said, something's wrong. I've got to call him. Something's badly wrong. She called my family and found out that morning I'd gone into the hospital in coma, seizing, and had meningitis and might not live. And so that was my birth mother's connection with me, even though we've been apart for 54 years of our lives. She still had this strong, powerful, oh my God, something's wrong with him. So telepathy is something that connects, souls that are deeply connected. And that's absolutely what happened in my particular case there. So telepathy just shows us that these boundaries of the mind are not as sharp as we'd like to think. And when you have an NDE, for example, when Anita Morjani, we discussed her a little while ago, she wrote Dying to Be Me, when she had her profound near-death experience in the setting of coma while dying from Hodgkin's lymphoma, she actually had this profound vision where she connected with the soul of her father. He had passed over years earlier. And he's the one who basically told her, if you decide to go back, you'll be fine. Your cancer will disappear. So she came back to this world knowing her cancer would disappear, and it did. Her doctors insisted on biopsying it. The interesting thing is the biopsies, most doctors would think, well, the immune system must have kicked in and, really kind of tore the cancer to pieces. Well, that's not what you see under the microscope. They basically found the cancer was just disappearing. It was, apoptosis is the medical term.
Interesting.
Cells go through
That's crazy.
programmed death, and the cancer was just, we're out of here. No more purpose. So we're gone. And so anyway, the big point, and you were asking minutes ago, what's the big message here? And the big message is, as we step out of our little ego self, and I love how Michael Singer in his book, The Untethered Soul, he calls that voice in your head your annoying roommate. Yep, that's it. Don't think that the voice in your head is your consciousness. Your consciousness is aware of that voice, but the consciousness of your higher soul has access to far grander aspects of self. That's why that psilocybin 1 dose works to defeat addictions and fear of death. But likewise, we can accomplish that through meditation and kind of connecting to that higher soul.
You know what? You've said meditation several times on here, and I just want to give a quick nod to that real quick. I mean, Tom and I are huge meditators. Tom's on like day 3,000 or something ridiculous in a row.
2,500 and change.
Yeah, I mean, so like we're super into that. But here's the thing: I can, and especially since this isn't a commercial, but we talk about Neurovisor a lot because both Tom and I have had a huge, profound impact on our lives with this little gadget. But you can get into some psychedelic states with that thing pretty easily. And again, it's frequency, vibration, like optics. It's all of it. But like, I've never seen any of that get me anywhere near where psychedelics has, right? Like, and so like, maybe I'm just doing it wrong. I don't know. But like, I just can't get that deep. I can get pretty deep with meditation, but nothing like that.
What I can tell you is Christopher Bache, B-A-C-H-E, has done 72 high-dose LSD trips in a pursuit of spiritual wisdom. He wrote a beautiful book called Diamonds from Heaven that I can recommend. But more importantly, in this discussion, Christopher Bache also wrote a book that I think came out maybe 25 years ago, something around that. It's called Dark Night, Early Dawn. And in that book, in chapter 5, he does a direct head-to-head comparison with his results from using high-dose LSD versus the results of Robert Monroe at Monroe Institute, who was well known for using binaural beats to do spiritual exploration. And chapter 5 in Dark Night, Early Dawn is a direct head-to-head comparison where Chris Bache actually acknowledges that using sound alone, Robert Monroe at least was able to make tremendous progress in a direction kind of parallel to what Christopher Bache was uncovering and discovering on his own.
Well, so Monroe Institute, those recordings, you can I mean, you could trip balls on those things. I mean, that you can go real down the rabbit hole. I mean,
well, that's where I recommend the sacred acoustics from my viewpoint. I worked as a research director at Monroe Institute for a while. And yes, I loved what they had.
They didn't want to talk to us.
Yeah,
we've reached out to them.
But the interesting thing is their R&D for most intents and purposes came to an end in 1995 when Monroe left this world. And part of the issue was just a legal battle between the for-profit and not-for-profit arms. I won't go into all that because I really don't know the details at all.
That's all right.
But what I can tell you is that Sacred Acoustics, that Karen Newell, my wife, and the co-author of Living in a Mindful Universe, and Kevin Cossie has put together, I have found to be incredibly powerful. And I highly recommend people go to sacredacoustics.com to check them out. Now, one important thing is they have a pilot study in the peer-reviewed literature that was done by Dr. Anna Yusum. It was published in the Journal of Nervous and Mental Diseases in, I think it was February of 2020, so right at the beginning of the pandemic. And what she found was in a busy Manhattan psychiatric practice in addressing anxiety, that Sacred Acoustics listening over 2 weeks gave a 26% reduction in symptoms of anxiety versus only a 7% reduction over 2 weeks in people who got standard talk psychotherapy for anxiety. So in other words, just listening to these tones through headphones or earbuds, you got to split the sound into the two channels. Gave a 26, 3 times the reduction that she was finding with standard talk psychotherapy. And believe me, getting rid of anxiety is just the beginning of what this stuff does. And plus, the set of audio files that were used in that study is called the Whole Mind Bundle. If you go to sacredacoustics.com now, you'll find that Whole Mind Bundle is still available at a deep discount. At the beginning of the pandemic, when Karen realized, well, anxiety is going to be everywhere in a pandemic, and with economic collapse, et cetera. So not only did she drop the price to $19, she also gave a free option. So there's a free button right there, so you can get the whole set that was so successful in this pilot study for free, even today. In other words,
isn't that funny? People that are real passionate about this, it's never been about money, right? I doubt.
No, it's really not. It's about making the world a better place. And
totally.
Karen, if you saw her like I do in patient support, she'll get, a client support, she'll get an email from somebody at 2:00 on a Sunday morning. And by 3 a.m., she's generated an answer. So she is really helping people, and just a total, her heart is in this stuff. And anyway, if you check out sacredacoustics.com, you'll see exactly what I mean.
I'm actually looking forward to checking that out a lot. I think one thing that I would like to also kind of like acknowledge is your comment earlier about science taking this more seriously, right? I think that with knowledge comes more knowledge, right? And I think the more we dig into this stuff and the more we start to see the interconnected nature of it all, I think you kind of, to your point, you kind of have to really take it seriously, because you're like, well, there's too much evidence here now, right?
There's way too much.
Like too much, right? But here's what hasn't caught up, like the popular culture mental vernacular hasn't caught up. People don't still have words for it.
I promise you that's happening now.
It's happening. The show helps it, like people we talk to are in that world. But like, look, we live in a little bubble over here, right? Like we talk to people like you, Doc, you're a great guy, but you're not like, your average Joe on the street, right? Like, I mean, let's be honest, like neither is
average.
Yeah, right. Like, and neither Marilyn's definitely not, nobody who's been on this show has really been like a down the middle kind of person, but like, that's not, as one of our guests and good friends said, average people are who you see at a Walmart, like just walk into Walmart. And that's average.
Well,
I don't know many of those people that are investigating near-death butterfly consciousness.
And that's not a shot at them. It's really,
not a shot at them. No,
right,
not at all.
Well, I figure you got to meet people where they are. This is not up to people to come meet me. This is up to me to help people from where they are. And one thing I'd like to point out is there was a book written by a neurosurgeon who's very respected, Canadian neurosurgeon, and he wrote this book called Mystery of the Mind. Wilder Penfield was the neurosurgeon's name. Mystery of the Mind. He wrote in 1975. That's the same year that Raymond Moody wrote the book Life After Life, where he first kind of introduced near-death experiences to the world at large. Now, in Penfield's book, Mystery of the Mind, he'd been stimulating the brain in awake patients for decades. Now, I've done a lot of those operations myself. The brain doesn't feel any pain. So if you anesthetize the scalp, you can do a big opening, take off the skull, and then the patient is sedated for that part. But then once you're working on the brain, you can lighten their sedation so you can talk with them. And you can stimulate the brain, and they can report what that stimulus reveals. In decades of doing that work, he wrote a book that made it very clear that as a neuroscientist with a hardcore materialist approach, that he was relieved to find that you cannot fully explain mind by workings of brain. And he said, this is a great relief to those of us who kind of assume kind of a spiritual nature to mankind, even though he was a hardcore scientist to the end. But he had way too much evidence from the work he had done to show the brain is not doing all this, that there's much more to it. And the book is very well written, but the world wasn't ready for that back in 1975. The world is ready now. Now that
more ready. Let's
say more ready.
Yeah. I'll meet you at more ready. I still don't think your average TikTok doom scroller is ready for.
Well, just read Jeffrey Mishlov's first place essay at BigelowInstitute.org, just as a starter, and you'll see quickly it's so powerful. And he has appeals to all these video interviews he's done. That's one way he kind of jumped beyond the 25,000 word limit on the essays, was he had all these embedded videos. Mishlov he had a show on public television called Thinking Aloud, and now he's got a YouTube channel, New Thinking Aloud. He's probably interviewed more people with true knowledge about what we're talking about than anybody on earth. He's been doing that for decades. And a lot of those interviews he could put into his little essays as video vignettes. So very powerful. There are also many other approaches in those BigelowInstitute.org essays. For example, Bernardo Kastrup has one that's completely defined by the principles of quantum physics. And he has to go nowhere else to make the case that consciousness is not created by the brain, but is something fundamental to the universe. And that's, of course, what a lot of the founding fathers of quantum physics claimed back in the 1930s, 1940s, like Erwin Schrödinger, Max Planck, Pascual Jordan. They all said, consciousness is, we can't get behind it. It is the thing that exists, and you can't really get outside of it to analyze it, because all of us live in this ocean of consciousness, just like a fish lives in the water. And, we can't imagine, it's very hard for us to see consciousness from the outside. And that's why you need kind of a bigger theater of operations to make any of these claims. But that's where near-death experiences and all the scientific study of reincarnation, after-death communications, terminal lucidity, where people with terrible brain disease that might have put them in coma for months, right before they die, they tend to wake up and come fully back to life to interact with a family before they die with a smile on their face, as they're acknowledging that a loved one who's passed over is there to welcome them over. So that's the big thing, is to wake up, and if you're quote, skeptical is one thing, but most people in this, especially who write about these things, who claim to be skeptical, are actually what we call pseudo-skeptics. They've made up their mind. They don't care about empirical data or rational argument. They've already decided that materialist science has disproven that NDEs can be real because the brain creates consciousness. So they have no room for opening their mind
for
to anything else.
Yeah, that's contrary.
But that's where BigelowInstitute.org will wake you up, and you will realize, oh my God, of course, there is no other solution. We're spiritual beings in the spiritual universe, and we have free will that has tremendous power, as opposed to the materialist scientist in me who would scoff at free will before my coma. Well, I know now that it's the philosophical position that it leads us to is something called evolutionary panentheism. Don't stop at panpsychism. That's a pseudo-materialist explanation that doesn't work at all. But panentheism, that God force, that one mind, is distributed across all sentience throughout the cosmos, and that each and every one of us participates in that.
And that's where it starts to get dicey for those, everyday folks, right? When you start saying God consciousness, people start to confuse that with like
religion,
some kind of like a
no,
religion
you don't
situation.
have to. It doesn't. I mean, it's God, Allah, Brahman, Vishnu.
No, listen, I'm certainly not picking on you.
Forget about
I'm
it.
with you.
We try and define it and label it, but ultimately, it's the nature of this deep reality that we approach when we leave the body at the time of death, and people can get there through meditation. That's my main point.
I'm actually going to try harder on that
through meditation.
I'm going to try harder on the meditation front because I do think you seem to be pretty emphatic on that. And I'm like, listen, I mean, you're making me a believer here, buddy.
It's great, but you remember that also. This is where we get the living done. This is where we evolve as souls, is when we're stuck in these bodies and we're dumbed down. We don't no longer have that knowledge of higher soul. And that's how we're meant to address it here. That's how we're meant to have skin in the game to live these lives. And what NDEers, and not just NDEers, but the hospice community, palliative care, they'll tell you the same thing. The very same things happen. If you read Christopher Kerr's book, Death is But a Dream, he's hospice buffalo. He doesn't care about NDEs, but when you read that, you'll realize the very same stories unfold in people who are dying naturally in a hospice or any kind of palliative care setting. So these are not just, people complain, oh, well, NDEs, they didn't go on to die. I want to know what happens when you die. Well, ask Christopher Kerr in that hospice palliative care literature in his book, Death is But a Dream, and you'll see the very same things happen. People come into connection with souls of departed loved ones. In fact, Gregory Shushan, who's written extensively about ancient cultures and their NDEs, says that's the feature that you find in every culture, bar none. And that is that the souls of departed loved ones welcome us over. And it's not just wishful thinking. It's much more than that.
The consistency of those stories is what strikes me when I hear you talking and people like you talking. It's an eerily consistent story. And again, we've only had this sort of modern communication paradigm that we can enjoy now for a few decades, which in a anthropological sense is a blink of an eye, right? Like we're barely. And yet these stories go back millennia, right? Like, you're sort of like, okay, well, they weren't getting on. There was no echo chamber on Twitter, 5,000 years ago. Like that just didn't happen, right? So what else explains it? There's got to be something, right? I mean, it's not just made up.
No, it's I think it's important to point out also that I would say that all of our major religious systems came from somebody somewhere having, a near death or a similar kind of shocking experience that showed them a grander world than what they were used to just in the physical. But also note that until 1968, when doctors developed techniques for resuscitating cardiac arrest patients, most people who had cardiac arrest went on to die. So in 1968, the universe upped the ante tremendously. And we now have tens of millions of people who have experienced the other side and now come back to tell about it. And that's a big game changer. And that's actually what's driving a lot of this revolution, is not just people saying, this is an interesting story. I like this podcast. Life, after death. That's an interesting concept. No, these people are having their own experiences and looking for answers. I know there's thousands of people.
That's an interesting thing. I never thought about that before.
You just sent me down this weird collective consciousness shift, right? We talk about the 60s, especially the Summer of Love and all that, but CPR as a method of consciousness expansion and the coalescence of that, how that dovetailed into a similar oh my God damn it.
Just one very quick story here. A good friend of mine who does a lot of regression work, hypnotic regression with people to take them back into past lives, and he's done work with a cardiologist. It's very good. Well, he had one case he was doing where this old guy died, and they were resuscitating him. And in the old guy's world, he's reuniting with his favorite hunting dog that had died like a decade earlier. And so he's getting into this NDE, and there's his dog licking his face, and he's loving everything about it. And they shock him and bring him back. And he's like, what are you guys doing? He didn't want to come back. He loved being there with his hunting dog, his buddy. So anyway, there are thousands of stories out there where you start realizing that people have these experiences all the time. And that's
Yeah.
what they're looking for, is answers. And the scientific world is finally coming up with some answers. Living in a Mindful Universe is a great start. Our book, for this really heavy-duty, scientifically minded, I would steer you to Edgar Kelly's work out of University of Virginia. Ed Kelly is the editor of 3 of the most powerful scientific books on these topics that you can find. Irreducible Mind, I think 2007. And it's 800 pages, so be ready for a deep dive. And then the
Got the
next
Cliff
book
Notes on that one. I don't know, 800 pages.
in 2015 was Beyond Physicalism, and finally in March of 2021 he put out Consciousness Unbound. And these are extremely deep scientific books. He is a rigorous scientist. He's worked in electrical engineering, done a lot of EEG work, runs the lab at University of Virginia where they investigate a lot of these cases. And those 3 books are absolute world changers. I mean, any scientist who reads, especially just go to the 3rd book, Consciousness Unbound, and you will quickly see the scientific world is well on its way to coming up with a worldview that makes all this make sense. But we're never going back to the bleak and paltry fiction of materialism, because it's just outright wrong. And the fact that the Nobel Prize Committee gave out the award for quantum entanglement in 2022 to 3 people who had done work over the last 4 decades, proving spooky action at a distance was right. Real entanglement, not hidden variables, which is what Einstein thought would be the answer. You realize that admission in 2022, that the Nobel Prize for entanglement, because entanglement is basically the mental field that connects us all to all these life events beyond space and time. That's what allows for life reviews to be all-inclusive, is that
entanglement is like a whole nother podcast, I think, because it's like that. You can go down hours on just that one topic. I mean, it's really...
Well, I'm sure you'll find quantum physicists who will say I'm a nut to even claim that consciousness and entanglement are using identical information structures, but I can tell you they just don't know enough about consciousness.
I don't
know enough about quantum physics, even though I could learn a lot more about quantum physics.
I think I would challenge you. I think that's a lot more in line than you think. Most of the quantum guys that I talk to and know, like they're very much aware of that connection between the quantum layer, if you will, and the consciousness layer.
Yeah, well, it's clear as a bell to many of us, but
yeah, it feels clearer to them too, right? I mean,
there literally is so few of these that we've done where I'm just adding to my Amazon cart, bookmarking web pages and not talking.
Yeah.
But Dr. Alexander, man, this was, I didn't talk much, but this was one of my favorite conversations.
Well, yeah, thanks. I hope I haven't just blabbed my way.
No, not even a little bit.
But... No, you opened so many more doors, answered a bunch of questions I had, and gave me a ton of homework.
And listen,
well, it's all good too. I mean, believe me, this takes you in a positive direction.
Yeah.
But
and see a lot more power for your soul to impact this world in a way that you want to do.
And thank you for saying that, because what I'm realizing, and I'm forming my own thoughts on this over time, show after show. But like, I think summarily, what I could say is, even if it's all bullshit, and I'm not saying it is, but even if it is, the worst thing that happens is you're a little bit better of a person for having explored the idea at all than you were before. So like Tom and I's sort of premise of the show was like risk reward, like, is this risk worth whatever we're trying to do it for? And in these kinds of cases, I'm like, you don't risk anything. Worst case scenario is you had to go out on a woo-woo branch for a couple hours, a couple days. Who gives a shit? Like, I mean, it's just play around, come back a better person and move on. Like, that's it. Like, like it. And I love, and having these conversations kind of reinforcement for that. Listen, I know you went into a bunch of stuff here, but I could talk to you forever. I know Tom could too, but like, in the interest of just not going on forever and ever, let's get to the commercial about you. What are you up to these days that we can kind of get people interested about? Like,
you mentioned a ton of books and everything.
A million things that we'll have all in the show notes, so we don't have to worry about that.
Sharon and I are working on other books, but I would recommend people can stay up with the work we do. For one thing, go to ebenalexander.com. That's my website, and I particularly recommend the reading list. There's a very active reading list there. It's categorized, and also It's has a lot of hot links to active scientific papers, things like that. So it's a very useful recommended reading list that I recommend. Also, don't forget the FAQ page. I mean, certainly for people who have any kind of questions about me and my career, and there's one lay press article that tried to discredit me and take me down. The answer to all of that is there at the FAQ page. Also, there are many interviews and podcasts, et cetera, that are all listed there. So ebenalexander.com is a great starting point. Of course, it has links to the books. And I would recommend people look at the endorsers for the books, especially Living in a Mindful Universe. We got some of the leading kind of scientists worldwide on modern consciousness studies endorsing Living in a Mindful Universe. Also go to sacredacoustics.com. It's a very informative site.
Definitely putting that one in
just to give you information about how to meditate, how to get the most out of meditation. And there are many specific files that Karen recommends on that website. Also, Inner Sanctum Center, INNER, sanctumcenter.com is a great resource. And that's one that Karen and I started at the beginning of the pandemic. And what happened was we realized that all these people we'd normally meet at the meetings on these topics were now going to be grounded. We're all going to be stuck in pandemic mode. And so we started every 2 weeks calling one of them up and interviewing them. All those interviews are available for free at innersanctumcenter.com. In addition, there is a mental health practitioner course that we did there with Dr. Anna Yusum. Karen and I and Dr. Yusum did that course. That does have a cost attached to it. It's mainly for professionals, but that's also at innersanctumcenter.com. Plus, there is also an option there to join us for a monthly sit down and fireside chat kind of greet. So innersanctumcenter.com is a great resource. And of course, the other places I've mentioned, uvadops.org and bigelowinstitute.org, very important websites.
Our AI is going to be quite busy cataloging all of the things.
Plenty of information out there to firm it up. But my main advice is be careful what you believe, because your beliefs can be falsely limiting, much more commonly than they're falsely opening the doors, to woo-woo nonsense. There's a lot of deep truth to what's going on here. We're talking about a lot of human experience. And it's very liberating for people, especially if you've lost a loved one or if you have a terminal diagnosis, you're facing, morbidity, mortality in a child or something like that. There's a tremendous benefit to seeing kind of the grander aspect of who we are and why we came here and kind of shared meaning and purpose with the universe at large and with our fellow beings, and never forgetting that it's ultimately all about unconditional love, kindness, and compassion.
That's what it all comes back to, apparently, huh? Everybody says that over and over and over and over and over.
Always steer us back to that golden principle, that, the golden rule. Treat others as you would like to be treated, because that is what life reviews say, with three-quarters of those life reviews all focusing on it's from the perspective of everyone involved, which means if you hand a lot of pain and suffering to somebody else or greed or what have you, when you receive that during the life review, it shows you it didn't feel so good. So gently over time, life reviews are nudging all of conscious sentience towards the golden rule, towards taking care of each other. But obviously this world today is still way too much slave to the false sense of separation, of materialism. And that's why we have people mistreating people, warfare, violence, etc., as opposed to this new worldview where we're all sharing that one mind, and that binding force is love and compassion and kindness. This is what will make the world a better place.
And like I said, that's the worst thing that could happen.
I can't tell you how bad I needed this today.
Yeah, that was the worst that could possibly happen, is that we all love each other a little bit.
I often say that for me, the worst thing would be to spend my whole life as a materialist, like I was before my coma. And then you get to the end of your life when your loved ones are coming out of the spiritual realm to welcome you back. And you go, oh my God, I thought this was just wishful thinking. It's real. And then you realize you wasted your whole life as a materialist, pretending it's just, get all the toys you can before you die, or whatever the materialist goal is.
Right.
But this is really all about higher soul and much more purpose to life, and kind of living that love and compassion and bringing that back into the actions and thoughts of this world. Well,
man, Doc, it was awesome talking to you. You might win the award for the longest show notes we're going to have ever.
I just hope it helps people out there, because this world needs some help.
Yeah, man. I appreciate your time. It. Yeah. So nice having you. And yeah, man, have a great weekend and look forward to telling the world about you.
All right. Well, you guys too. I appreciate this. A lot of fun. Let us know when it's up and we'll put it out on social.
Definitely.
Okay, guys. Take care. Enjoy the weekend.
Thanks.
Bye.
Be subversive, irreverent.
Health is wealth, but you knew that.
Everybody knows that.
But so is following us on social media at Irreverent Health. And check out our website for more exclusive content at irreverenthealth.com.
Oh, I like this.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of Irreverent Health.